Hello everyone, I am Tacet, and today I'm going to be going over the top 10 unique traits in Gems of War. These are traits that can only be obtained on a single troop. These can be obtained on legendaries, mythics, as well as on all hero classes. Something that I did for this list, it was actually a lot harder to come up with a top 10 list for these unique traits than just the general traits, mostly because every single legendary trait for the most part has its own utility in which it is good in specific situations. So for this top 10 list of the best unique traits that there are, I ended up eliminating them based on which ones can actually help in utility and winning the game pretty much as quick as possible. Some of the slower ones, which are made more for tanking, I ended up omitting, such as some of the other good traits in the game, such as Immense on Behemoth, which would do 4 HP on 4 times or higher matches, as well as things like Granite Skin, which is a really good trait on Gorgotha, which reduces skull damage by 75%. The main problem with it, though, is that's all it really does. It's just for a tank and doesn't exactly increase the speed in which you win a match. One other thing that I omitted from this list are troops that have that either fall off or come back in either earlier on or later on in the game. For example, Gerald. Gerald is a lot better earlier on in the game than he is later in the game with his legendary ability, because burn becomes weaker and weaker the further you get in, because people will start having more armor and HP and probably even have cleanse on their team and stuff like that. So you won't be able to do as much with a burn as you would compared to earlier on in the game. Similarly, I'm also omitting Corvash from this list. Even though he's extremely good in late game, not everything has traits earlier on in the game, so it doesn't really do that good to those people. So this is going to be the list. First off, we have Hunger. Hunger is the trait on the Great Maul. It was reworked from his previous ability of a Hunger that used to be a 15% chance to devour. That was definitely very strong, but Hunger is still similarly strong. Whenever it takes skulls, it's gaining 2 to all stats, and since it doesn't use magic, that means it's going to be gaining 2 attack, 2 armor, and 2 HP per skull. One thing that actually makes this really good in comparison to the previous Maul is that the Great Maul no longer has to be in the first slot. It's still pretty decent in the first slot, but now you can put it in something like second slot, and it doesn't matter who takes the skulls, you still gain these stats for the Great Maul. So as your whoever troop you have in the front is just doing whatever it's doing, every single time you're still taking skulls, the Great Maul is getting it despite being in a different slot, which is what really makes this Hunger trait good, because with the Huge and the Hunger, you can actually start to get almost tankier than you could have with the 15% chance to devour, because at least with Hunger, it's consistent. You know every single time when you take a skull exactly what's going to happen, instead of having to go by a random percent chance. Next up, we have Aspect of Death, which is on the Mythic Death, if I can spell Aspect. Aspect of Death. And of course, it is on Death. It steals 2 life from the first enemy at the start of each turn. This is really good with other true damage. You can end up racking up a lot of HP without even doing anything on this troop. Good with other healers and things that can buff it up HP-wise. It's really good for those matches that you might fall a little bit behind on, and you'll just be able to have some consistent damage to tick down on. And it is very consistent, since it's always going to be hitting HP. You'll be able to kill fairly quick with this. You just place it with a couple other true damage dealers, and it'll just melt to it. And it's really good at picking off things that you might not be able to kill, like if you do a Crimson Bat or an Emperor Corvash cast to do a bunch of AoE true damage. Well, you might be a little damage short, and instead of waiting and getting all the mana for another cast, you can kind of just let Aspect of Death kill it off while you take mana or skulls instead. Next up, we have Aspect of Famine, which is actually right here. Famine, it's essentially the same thing as Death, except it reduces a random 1 by 3, and it doesn't actually claim the skill. One thing that makes this fairly useful is similar to Death. Even if your moves aren't going that well, if the match is kind of going against you some and you start reaching like into double-digit amount of turns within the match. It's really good at just ticking down the enemy to make sure they won't be a threat. And combined with all of its other disables like Drain and Reinforced and Jinx, it's going to come in handy to just kind of set the enemy back while you just fill up the rest of your troops. Next up, we have pretty much every single thing with 3 times or 5 times skull damage. This would include Web Spinner with 3 times on Poison, Borealis with 3 times on Frozen, and Bunny Log, which you can actually see I don't have traded, but it's 5 times on Knights. Most of these are fairly situational, since you would actually need to be able to get the status effect on them. With something like Borealis, you'd probably need something like a Queen Mab or another Freezer on your team, just to make sure you can definitely get the first troop frozen. One of the reasons I actually don't have Bunny Nog upgraded, even though it is a really good trait, is mostly because Knights aren't used that much in the late game. The main 2 Knights that are really popular in this game is Knight Coronet and War, both of which are better earlier on in the game than later on, which is why I don't personally have it. But for some people earlier on, it would be better. The main reason for this is War does burn to everything, which falls off later, as well as Knight Coronet, who there's better alternatives out there once you get to the late game. So those are those. Next up, we have Dragon Vines. And this is essentially going to do exactly what Gorgotha does, except you don't have to waste a slot with Gorgotha. It can entangle the first enemy with 4 times or higher matches. And since it always hits the first enemy, you'll be able to just keep entangling them over and over again and make sure they do not do skull damage. Of course, if they have immune to entangle, that will completely ruin it. But even if they have something like a cleanse, the fact that it always targets the first enemy will make it so cleanse doesn't really matter that much. And you can essentially not even worry about you basically don't need to worry about skulls at all, as long as they don't put a counter to it up front. So it's a lot better alternative than that of Granite Skin, in my opinion. But there are still a lot more counterable. The main reason I prefer Dragon Vines over Granite Skin now is because with something like a Gorgotha, once it gets devoured or death marked or something like that, it's going to be gone. But once your Salvani Mora dies from something, the Dragon Vines are still going to be on the first troop for a couple more turns. So even after his death, there's still going to be a couple more turns in which skulls will do absolutely nothing. Plus, this is a 100% counter to skulls, whereas Gorgotha is only a 75% counter to skulls. Next up, we have 2 that are three actually for the hero classes, so we'll tap out of that. Dark Channel, Bullseye, and Assassinate for number 5 and 4 twice. So let's just go into that real quick. We have to go all the way backtrack into the hero menu to get there. Go, load! Okay, let's start off with the number 5 first, Sorcerer. Sorcerer has a 50% chance to gain 1 magic every single turn. This is absolutely amazing with any full AoE hero weapon that doesn't that takes a 1-to-1 ratio, because there are some that take a 1-to-2 ratio for balance reason, but any of them that do a full AoE at a 1-to-1 ratio are absolutely insane with Dark Channel. The best one to actually group it with, you can actually get from another class, which is Necromancer. It's normally paired up with something like a Creeping Death, especially since how strong it is in this version of the game, which just does full AoE damage and has actually the highest AoE damage of any AoE weapon of the hero class, or any hero weapon for that matter, I mean. So really good choice to pair up with Dark Channel. Anyways, the other 2 are tied between Archer and Assassin. These are arguably actually the best 2 traits in the game if you can make a good skull spam team with them, but I did place them a little bit lower. The main reason why they are so strong right now is they essentially have no counter. 50% Bullseye is essentially what the Great Maul used to be, except it doesn't devour. It just does a 50% chance to kill whenever you do skull damage. This is really good against Impervious troops as well, because Impervious does not stop Bullseye or Assassinate. It kills right through it. There's literally nothing that stops this, except I think the only thing that might still stop Bullseye, if I'm not mistaken, is Gloomleaf's 50% chance. His that legendary ability of 50% reflect on skull damage. If I'm not mistaken, Bullseye takes infinite damage if it triggers on that. So other than that, it essentially has no counter in the entire game. Doesn't matter if they have granite skin or anything like that. One other reason why I put Dragon Vine so high with Sylvania Mora is Dragon Vines actually stops things like Bullseye and any other kind of skull effect, even the Maul and stuff like that. The main reason for this is with this, it actually has to do damage to be able to trigger, because most of these say on skull damage. And with Bullseye, if you just take a 3 times pair while you're entangled, it'll do literally nothing. Whereas against Granite Skin, you're still gonna take the 15% chance to be instantly killed. Anyways, and this assassin class is similar, except it is a 10% chance, but it kills from the back. This is pretty good because killing from the back with a lineup that's really not expected in most team compositions that are out there. It is a 5% chance lower, but from what I've seen, Gloomleaf doesn't automatically kill it if you just does trigger on it, so that's a plus. And you're going to be killing from the back, so it's a little bit better. Since you're already doing skull damage to be able to trigger this, you're going to be damaging the first troop while you are killing the last. With something like the Archer class where you have the chance to kill the first troop, well, you're going to be damaging the first troop, but you also have the chance that you're killing the first troop. So if you happen to kill it, well, you're not really doing anything with your skull damage, you're just killing it. With the assassin class, you're both doing damage and you're killing something that's completely different than the thing that you're damaging. So that's something else that makes it pretty good. It is a 5% chance lower, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it can be a pretty huge amount given that you won't be getting too many skulls unless you do like really big skull spams. So next up on the list, number 3. Number 3, we have Aspects of Plague, which is essentially Moloch's trait. Moloch does enemies lose 1 skill point or 4 times or higher matches, except it's on steroids, and it does wrong tab, and it does twice as much. Enemies lose 2 skill points on 4 times or higher matches. You get this with something that can create a bunch of 4 times or higher matches, and you're just lowering the stats of the enemy like crazy. And combined with his ability that even lowers them further, you'll be able to get the enemy down to 0 attack, 0 magic, 0 everything fairly quickly and make them all pretty much a non-threat unless they have like extra status effects and stuff on their ability. So really strong at countering that. Plus he has Impervious, so even some of those status effects and stuff like I just mentioned, they're really not going to be able to do anything since they are going to be disabled. One other thing to note is if you happen to reduce the attack of an enemy by 0 or to 0, they won't be able to trigger any of their on-skull effects, like I was just saying with the Archer class and Bullseye, Assassin, and pretty much every other on-skull effect will not trigger if their attack is 0. So things like Entangle and reducing their attack to 0 can be very effective in countering any kind of skull spam team, which is they're pretty popular right now. And one good thing about Aspect of Plague and Plague in general is it doesn't matter if they have Impervious or something, even something like a Manticore, you can still disable it down and it won't be a threat at all, even through the Impervious, because Impervious does not stop stat reduction. Next up, we have Bloodsucking on the Bats. We go to all. And right into Crimson Bat. Does a bunch of true damage. It deals double skull damage whenever the enemy is wounded, which is fairly easy to do. Wounded just means that their HP is lower than whatever their max HP is. So even if you damage them slightly and then they HP buff, unless they actually healed, if it's just an HP buff, you'll still be doing 2 times damage. Only a heal will actually cause it to do regular damage again. And since not many heals are in the game, the only things that really have a good heal is the Priest class, Dryad, and Emperorina for full heal. There's a couple others that's mixed in there as well in the game, but those are the main few that are used to heal. But most teams don't really use healers since they are a lot slower, so this really allows Crimson Bat to be strong. The fact that he does true damage will also assist with it. The fact he has Curse, that's a 25% chances from the very first turn that he'll hit HP, which means he'll be doing 2 times skull damage. from the very first turn if that happens to trigger. And if you have multiple cursed on your team, that's just increasing that chance even more. And if you have 3 or more, that's almost a guaranteed chance at that point with how high the ratio will be. And lastly, for the best trait in my opinion, is Winter Veil. Queen Mab in general, as far as offensively, in her ability, has gone down a lot, mostly because it costs 3 more for her ability to trigger, and the fact that everything can basically counter mana burn now that there's Impervious, and there's a bunch of new troops coming in that have a mana shield, which she can do absolutely nothing against. But aside from that, what really makes her good, of course, is the Winter Veil, being able to freeze the entire enemy team. This is so crucial for any kind of looping team. If you're using any looping team in this game, you absolutely need a Winter Veil just to make sure you can get all of them frozen, or as many as you can if they have like immunity to it in any way. And you can just keep looping freely, and then even if you ended up missing your loop, you're still going to get that turn right back and be able to continue with it. One other troop that is somewhat good at this is Bone Dragon. It freezes whenever it takes skull damage, but it isn't as consistent as Winter Veil. Mostly, well, actually, is slightly more consistent as far as hitting the first troop, but it's not as consistent since it can only ever trigger on the first troop, whereas Winter Veil can trigger on all of the enemies. Well, that'll wrap it up for this video. I know there was a lot of good legendary traits out there that I couldn't exclude in this video, and I might do some kind of overview in the future on that. I don't know for sure. I'll definitely need to do a top 10 worst traits. That might have almost been better for this, just to show you guys what not to trait, because a lot of legendary traits, they're good under certain situations, and you just kind of have to find that situation in which they work good with, and then pretty much any of them will work. But there are some absolutely horrible upon horrible ones, like let's just go and show one real quick before we wrap up this video. Like, come on. Like, Goblin King, 20 HP if in the last position. Another one which is pretty much the same thing. That's not his name. I actually completely forget his name because he's so underused in this game because of how horrible his legendary trait is. Garnock gained 5 to all skills in last position. Well, he doesn't use magic for anything because once you get enough kingdoms, you already got him way maxed out. He's in the last position, so he's not really using attack. So you're paying a legendary ability for 5 armor and 5 HP. Plus, with both Goblin King and Garnock, you have to put these troops in the last position, or else they won't do anything, and that's just completely disabling them beyond belief. But yeah, I'll probably go over more of the absolute horrible ones. But anyways, that'll wrap it up for this video. If there was any really good traits that you felt should be mentioned, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I know I missed a lot of them, but I mostly focused on the ones that are going to win games quickly, rather than specifically more for utility, more towards the speed of actually being able to farm gold, farm PvP matches, and stuff like that. Anyways, that'll wrap it up. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.